25 years ago tomorrow, passed away. He had made great strides forward for the people of Chicago. It was too bad it happened the way it did. David, can you talk a little bit about the emergence of Harold Washington? A lot of people may not know, he had been in the Air Force. He had been a state representative, a state senator. He had run for Congress and had been a congressman. He had done a lot of work beforehand, but yet I must admit I didn't know a lot about him until he came on the scene after Mayor Daley died. Tell us a little bit about how you first saw Harold and how he emerged in your eyes.
Well, I don't remember all the details, but I do know the way in which we first connected was because I was very active in housing activism way before I was elected.
We had the Rogers Park Tenants outfit up here.
Yes, the famous committee. Toby Prince and others. And Rogers Park was a great hub of trying to win some fairness for renters and so forth. So I'd done a lot on housing, and his people wanted to talk to me. This is like the mid-'70s because they were trying to work on national housing policy. So that was the first link with Harold. And then in 1977, when he first ran for mayor, my apartment over on, actually my condo on Farwell was the North Side office. Now, he of course lost that election, but it also put him out there because he'd been a very intelligent and reform-minded but still machine congressman, almost had to be from that area, but he was beginning to break away, and after 77 he broke away even further. And so gradually, as we see what happened after the fluke 79 election, again, the arrogance of the machine, thinking they didn't have to put anybody else up, and then Bolandic loses to Jane Byrne in the big snowstorm. So it was, ironically, under policy that I first became, met him, worked with him, and so forth, on policy that helps average people.
You talked about Harold being a machine politician for a good amount of time, and he had to be. And then he started to break away. I'm reminded of the Olympian and politician here in town, Ralph Metcalf, who also was a machine politician and broke away too when a black doctor had been pulled over and harassed. And I'm not sure of the years and the timing, but it just seemed that things were moving forward. People who had been locked into these old positions were beginning to break away, and the black community was beginning to, stand up for its own interests.
Well, I was going to also remember Daley. Remember, the machine always had the support of the vast majority of African Americans.
Yeah.
But Daley Sr., in the 60s, he began doing so many vicious things that really hurt the black community, that even though many people felt like there's no options, okay? I'm going to get nothing from my people if I'm not part of the party. Okay, that argument. But when you look, all those things happened in the 60s, not just the riots, but the way he treated the attempt to build housing in various neighborhoods. Daley blocked all that. Daley even got top people in Washington, including people that we honor today, to block all that housing reform all through that period. So, by the early 70s, people were pretty fed up, and so that's when the break began. And remember, even, Daley won in 75, but people forget, Daley did not do that well in the primary. He beat Bill Singer and some others. But if you look at those signs, people begin to break away from that powerful Daley machine as early as 75.
The other thing that people don't know about Harold necessarily, Mayor Harold Washington, is that he was not only was he congressman from the powerful 1st Congressional District, but he was reelected to that office with the most votes of any of the other congressmen at that time. So in Congress, they pay attention to that. They know amongst themselves who's the guy here with the most weight. And it was Harold Washington, Congressman Harold Washington. And when Reagan was elected in 1980, Harold became I think Lane Evans was glad when Harold got elected mayor, because then he could be the most anti-Reagan voting congressman because Harold was the most anti-Reagan voting congressman until then. And I think that the other thing I feel about Harold that is lasting in some way, in a deep way, was that he matured Chicago. in terms of being a big city with a lot of different kind of people. You know, when Harold ran, and all of a sudden there were groups, not just women for Washington, but there were Arab Americans for Washington, there were Filipinos for Washington, there were all these groups who finally had a chance to get together and wave their banner, and he honored that.
Well, let me pick up on that just for a second, if we still have time, because, again, when we started out saying that Harold cared about average folks, and he governed that way. Let's talk about the Hispanic vote, which is so relevant now to the election we just saw for President Obama. So at that point, the 29 controls the council in a rather vicious way.
Eddie Verdoliak, Eddie
and then
Burke.
what happened is there was special elections in '86 because the map drawn by the city council was blatantly racist. A court took several years to
it was about
rule
a
that way.
10-year case.
Well, a map was drawn in '81. And it wasn't until '86, 5 years later, a long time though, that there was a special election. But the reason Harold Washington survived, got a majority, and won for re-election was because of his reaching out to the Hispanic community.
Sure.
So in '86, there were 7 aldermanic wards up for election, at least 4 of them Latino districts, and by winning those, it went from 29 to 21 to 25 to 25, which meant on tie votes it gave Harold a majority.
The tie-breaking vote.
So that was very significant, and then the downside of that, the other side of that coin, is the first thing the Daily Machine did come 1979 is look at the lay of the land and conclude we have to stop black Chicago, and the way to do that is recapture Latino, so white Latino together is more than black. And that's why they started the Hispanic Democratic Organization and basically used the resources, totally corrupt, hired thousands and thousands of people illegally, who were Latinos, to bring that vote over. And that's why great people at the time, like State Senator Chuy Garcia, were defeated.
Which was after, we're talking now after Harold's death.
That's right. What I'm talking about, after Daley was mayor, what I'm saying is they recognized, the power both of the African-American community, but in order to blunt that, looking to the future, what they did is build that powerful white and Latino. Now, again, nothing wrong with doing that, but the way in which they did it, illegally using the jobs to basically discriminate against the old Progressive Coalition.
You're listening to Live from the Heartland Show. We're talking with David Orr. We're remembering Harold Washington. I would like to ask you, David, what is the residue of the 29 in the divided council? Who's still left? I mean, I'm thinking about Eddie Burke and on who else is around, because here is a guy who definitely was not a positive figure in that time, and I don't think he's been a positive figure ever since, but he's still a very powerful politician in the city.
Well, the two, there may be more, but the two that I remember that left were the ringleaders through all that entire time, and the ringleaders of the election of Gene Sawyer, and that was Ed Burke, who was the brains behind the operation, and Dick Mell. Those were the two that once they realized they couldn't be mayor, I mean, they wanted to have a white mayor, and that famous long all-night
session.
All-night,
that was an exciting
party,
time.
when they convinced Sawyer to run. Those were the two really ringleaders at the time, and partly because of their powerful posts. Remember, Ed Burke, finance chair, still finance chair, with an enormous staff. And no dummy, a very bright guy, who also used his control. He controlled the police, which means he had to do with hiring and promoting most of the police in the city of Chicago, or if not most, but a great number. He and Verdoliak at the time. He also controlled the judges panel. So by controlling the judges panel and who gets picked, enormous influence on the future, and not to take away from his wife, Ann Burke, but he certainly had a lot to do with shepherding her to become a Supreme Court judge. So when you use your power like that, whether current Mayor Rahm Emanuel likes you or not, you notice he hasn't been dumped. Because when you have that kind of power, you know so much, you know where the bodies are buried, and a politician comes in, and I'm...
Hard to dump them.
Maybe this is not the case with Emanuel, but somebody comes in and they say, would it be worth it for me to go to war with this guy? Because he can do me a lot of damage.
Right.
So,
we have a few more minutes, and one thing to go away from Harold for a second, and that is the Jesse Jackson Jr. seat, which I'm saying over the radio to my sister Colette, who thinks I should run for it. I'm not going to move to the 2nd Congressional District. Colette, I'm sorry. I've thought about it since Thanksgiving night, and no, I don't. I appreciate it, but anyway, I saw you on TV, and I'm hoping that Governor Quinn is seeing the sense of what you were proposing, which is that whatever special election is run should certainly be run on the same day that there are already scheduled Cook County elections in some of the suburbs affected by that race. Has a decision been made yet?
No, but I'm pretty hopeful. I think the next week we'll know a lot more. Remember, the lay of the land is, except for Chicago, well, first, the district that Jackson's in includes a lot of precincts in Chicago.
Yep.
Most of the precincts, not most, but most of them are in suburban Cook County, and also Will and Kankakee. So 4 districts involved in that race. And except for Chicago, everybody has elections in February and April. Okay, except for Chicago. And so, as you said, we're trying very hard, even though there's some legal obstacles, to make those special elections fall on the same day as existing elections. Could save us a lot of money. And furthermore, few people vote in a special election. So if it's timed as another election, there'll be a little more turnout. So I think what's going to happen is the governor's going to announce something on Monday, probably setting up the special election for Congress being the same day as the primary in February. I think that's going to create a problem for March. But I've also been talking to the legislature, and I think the legislature comes back into session Monday, and I'm hopeful, knock on wood, that the legislature will also then allow us to change the law which says the 115 days, which means we could have the general election for congressmen the same day as the April election. If they do that, we will have won a big victory both for representation and saving the taxpayers money.
Yeah.
I do want to say that I just want to say I'm very sorry about the situation for Jesse Jackson Jr. We did have him at the Heartland a couple of times, both on the radio show and speaking. He was a pretty dynamic guy and looked like he had a good, strong future. He ran into some
he's
real
still with
potholes.
us.
He's still with us.
He's got a future.
And well, we hope he does, and I hope he's healthy and well at some point. I would like to.
I want to thank you for being mayor for a week, David.
Thank you.
There are thousands and thousands of people in this city.
I never got the pay.
Who always say, "I wish David Orr had run." I mean, there's no end to the people who will say that to this day.
Let me ask you about what you. Let's have a big round of applause for David Orr, one of our greatest mayors
One of the great
in the
mayors.
history of Chicago. And I want to ask you about Harold as a speaker. And we're going to play a little clip. It's a little fiery, this speech. It went out from Media Burn today. And so, Jay, if you could play that for us, and we'll see how the audio is on it. And then we'll just talk about Harold. Take a listen.
I think your mayor is a wonderful fellow, but I depart radically from him when he says that he would hope that I would have all the good qualities of past mayors. There are no good qualities of past mayors to be had. None.
I remember having a mayor.
I did not mourn at the bar of the late mayor. I regret anyone dying. I have no regrets about him leaving. He was a racist from the core, head to toe and hip to hip. There's no danger, doubt about it. And he spewed and fawned and oppressed black people to the point that some of them thought that was the way they were supposed to live. Just like some slaves on the plantation thought that was the way they were supposed to live. I give no hosannas to a racist, nor do I appreciate or respect his son. If his name were anything other than Daley, his campaign would be a joke. He has nothing to offer anybody but a bent-up tin can smile, no background.
Oh, man.
And he runs on the legacy of his name, an insult to common sense and decency. Everything I've ever got in the world, I worked for it. Nobody gave me anything.
Those were the days. Is that it?
And although I may sound abrasive, I have no malice toward anybody. I have a job to do. I've got places to go and things to do. And I approach this job just like any masterful surgeon when you have to cut out a cancer. I cut it out with no emotion. Get it out, get it out. This dominant culture may have messed up my pocket, but they haven't messed up my head one bit. So I approach this awesome job with pride. Pride in my community. Pride in the ability of my community to rouse up as though they had been a sleeping giant and to recognize that there is a responsibility that they have that they cannot shirk. Nobody else is going to shoulder that burden. I believe in the powers of redemption, and I simply cannot believe in the God I worship that he would permit us to sit on this earth for 400 years, or rather in this country for 400 years, and suffer the indignities which we have suffered, piled time after time, high after high, and so heavy it has almost broken the backs of one of the most powerful people in this world. I can't believe there is no redemption. But that redemption is not going to come out in hatred. It's going to come out in positive attitude toward our fellow man. I represent, and you represent, the fruit of the loom, the best this world has to offer. We've been through the crucible. We've been through the crucible. And we have come out with strong and powerful tensile strength. We are a high and good and moral people. We have no explanations to give to anybody. We don't have to explain our existence. We don't have to explain the thing that we want to, a part of the political power of this country, not to suppress anybody, but to add our good. We've come into the 1980s with an understanding that we have not just a right but a responsibility to give the best that we have to a society. We want to give it. And we're going to give it if we have to beat them across the head and knock them down and make them take it. We're going to give it to them.
Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2.